Okay, we will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Finance on June 4th via WebEx. And again, this meeting is called to order. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for the public, again, this is Jim Brown, Chairman of the Board of Finance. If you call to listen, you will not be heard by the board members, and there will be no live public comment. The public is encouraged to send their comments before or after the meeting to the following email, bof@fairfieldct.org. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We have 8 items on our agenda, and we will start by setting the mill rates. After a very long budget season, here we are, June 4th. And then we will, Mr. Case here, our tax collector, and we'll review the suspense list. Then we will go to discuss and act upon the memorandum of understanding for the Board of Finance, well, between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed in regards to the non-lapsing account. We will consider and approve and appoint the auditors for fiscal year 2021. We will again appoint a clerk and assistant clerk for the Board of Finance, for the year, all right, for May 2021. And then we'll go into private executive session and discuss third-party recovery effort regard to certain investments. So, with that said, any questions from the board? So we are good to go. So item number 3, to consider and set the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2021. Can I have a motion to put this before us, please? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Walsh. Ms. Marmee, did you have a question? No, okay. So this item is now before us. Ms. Gardner, if you could take us through the document, everybody, we should have the schedules for setting the mill rate dated June 4, 2020, this document before us.
Okay, if you'll all turn to Schedule A. This is the budget in a nutshell. What you have is the schedule of approved expenditures at $317,177,779, less the revenues that you produce from non-taxes. That would be fees, state revenue, prior year interest. That gives you your tax levy required before credits. We add in our credits, these we have discussed during the budget process, and you get your total tax levy required, and that's at $298,618,085. We look at our property available for assessment. Now, this is the final BAA, and sometimes we consider this a risk factor, but since this is now final, it's baked into the final equation, it doesn't present itself with any risk. That leaves you with a mill rate of 26.79. That is the same mill rate we have in the fiscal year 20 year. Therefore, the tax rate increase is 0%. I will call your attention to Schedule B, which really restates the same information, but it also demonstrates that your collection rate is 98.61. That is the collection rate you decided upon in order to bake in any COVID risk. Any questions so far?
Now,
Okay.
hey, Linda, I'm sorry, 1 second here.
Yes.
I just want to make sure there aren't any questions, and are you reading off this document? Can you go to the podium, as Ms. Kupchak said?
Oh, sure. Yes, here I am.
That's better. Good to see you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, are there any questions on schedule from the board on Schedule A or Schedule B? I'm seeing none. Okay, thank you, Linda. Continue.
I will just tell you that I included for your information in this package Schedule C, which is the fund balance document. And the fund balance has minutely changed for the better, given the RTM action, because they decreased expenses. So I wanted to show you what the new projection might be, given the estimated 20 outcome.
And that would be, sorry, Linda, that would be 10.936%?
That's correct.
Okay, any questions or comments from the board on Schedule C? Mr. Walsh?
We can take questions on Schedule C, but we didn't ask about Schedule A-1.
Jim, A-1 is just support for the state revenue that appears on Schedule A. You see on Schedule A, state revenue is summed at $5,034,000.
Yes,
And
yeah, I saw how it tied out to Schedule A. I did see that. My question, I
Yeah.
guess, to Schedule A is, have we heard anything, or has the first select woman heard anything where the state is threatening any one of these revenue lines or store
No, as a matter of
grants?
well, not at this time. We contacted CCM just prior to all this settling out. So there has been no talk of changes to these revenue items. We got confirmation from that. As much as we can rely upon it, it's the best information we have.
Okay, and when were those conversations? In like the last couple of days?
Last week.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now anything else on that? The last schedule, and this is really the meat and potatoes, this is why you're here tonight, is the schedule of the collection rate and the tax rate and the impact on the homeowner. And the tax rate that is proposed at this point is the current tax rate, 26.79. It's the one that is shown in that grayed out box. This will produce a tax rate at 0%. It gives you your 98.61 collection rate, and it shows you what your actual dollar amount of your reserve for uncollected taxes would be and the impact on the homeowner. As a courtesy, I've gone and given you some alternate mill rates as you have used in the past. You'd like to look at how that might impact the homeowner, but I think in this case, you've worked so hard to get it to the current mill rate that I'm certain you probably wouldn't be contemplating a change at this point.
No, but thank you for showing the alternatives, and thank you for showing, what the adjustments, if any, were made, would cause. That's helpful.
Okay. And that concludes my presentation. Any other questions? Thank you.
No other questions. I don't see any other questions from the board. So we're going to make, Mr. Walsh?
Well, I just would like to make a comment, not a question, but, the 98.61 is what we kind of all agreed to as a board, I thought we all agreed to it, that's what we were going to kind of be moving forward with based on Mr. Bremer's basically educated guess on where the lowest number in the last 20 years. But I think we all know that we're going to be using the fund balance to backstop that in case any of these revenue lines, which we are, they're all guesses right now based on we're in a pandemic crisis. We don't know where any of this is going to go. So I think we're all, at least I know I am, going forward with the fact that we know that we may be having to use fund balance to cover some of these revenue deficiencies as the year goes on. So I don't feel comfortable moving into anything other than the 98.61, which is kind of what we said we would use. But there is risk as we go forward. And I just would also like to thank, first of all, the team that met with the Board of Education in regard to getting the lower getting the higher bus credit for the time we didn't use the buses. And I think that would be Selectman Flynn, Mr. Bremer, on behalf of the town. I think the Board of Education, I'm not sure what representative, whether it was Ms. Vitale was part of that as well, and also Mr. Cummings and Doreen, so that we could get the most value for the taxpayers for next year. And I think it's great that the RTM, working in a bipartisan fashion, could cut the remaining portion to get this thing down this year. So I think it's
thank you, Mr. Walsh. Just to continue on that. So, and I don't want to get to zero. That's an accomplishment. I think I read today, Ms. Kupchak, it's the first time in 30 years.
That's what Mrs. Gardner has told me. She's been
she
there.
Would know.
I guess
so. She began her career at 0% and ends her career basically at 0%. So
no, that's pretty awesome, right?
So, yeah, that is. So we'll get to zero. And look, we all have a right to feel good about that. And there's a lot of hard work, a lot of thought, a lot of bipartisan effort on this board. And as Mr. Walsh said, appreciate the work the RTM put into this process. It worked in a collaborative manner, and as we did. And I think we felt, I know we all did, that getting to zero or close to zero was absolutely necessary in this economic environment, and that was the expectation. This includes the Board of Selectmen, and we thank the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Ed, the administration for the work that they did. And I think, it's important that we did this together as a board, and the RTM finished it off, getting it down to zero based on the most recent savings that Mr. Walsh had discussed with that meeting with the Board of Ed. It's just, and I don't want to rain on this parade, because this is an accomplishment, and it wasn't easy. And we put a lot of time, a lot of effort. Everybody involved did so. But we do have to realize and come to terms with how we did get to zero. Because most of the reduction was based on savings from COVID. And it's a good thing. And the fact is, we built, and all the town bodies did, we built up our reserves over the last 10, 12 years. And that proved to be a huge benefit for our budget in 2021. We're just not going to have those options in 2022. We basically used all of our levers the best way we thought possible for this budget. And then we made some adjustments with risk management. We did go into contingency. We didn't put forth any new initiatives. And we really did not affect services. And as we went through this process, the term cliffs kept coming up. And we all used them because we know that we have them for 2022. And we created them out of necessity, but they're there. And I believe we all realize next year is going to be just as difficult, maybe more difficult than this budget year. And as we stated, it's not a one-year process. If you just go through the list, we have OPEB, where we did not fund $3.8 million. However, we will take a look at the fund at the fund balance at the end of this year. Any surplus we have, we did, as a board, take a sense of the body and said we would dedicate those funds to OPEB. On top of OPEB of the 3.8, now we have our contribution to surplus, which is 1.2 million that we did not do. We bonded paving, which we normally don't do, of 1.0 million. Debt service reserve we went into for 2.3 million. That's 8.3 before we blink an eye. And we also had the Board of Ed of 3.3 million with this non-lapsing account that we'll work through, but that can certainly create a cliff. We're going to have to fund the pension next year. We certainly don't want to jeopardize our AAA credit rating, and we will not do that, but we're going to have to fund our long-term liabilities, and we can't overborrow, which leads us to the fill pile. Plus, we have contracts coming up over the next 8-9 months. We have a reval out there. We have a possible revenue shortfall to take into account. We did mitigate that with a $2.3 million reduction in revenue outside taxes. We have the tax collection rate at 98.61. We don't know, that's uncertain. We don't know how that's going to look. So what we did was we basically gave ourselves a runway for this year, and we're on it. As soon as we vote, we're on that runway. We did what we could do, I think, within our purview. I agree, and Ms. Kupchak has said, and we're all in agreement. A restructure is coming. A restructure is needed. And none of us want to find ourselves next budget season scrambling. Because if we find ourselves scrambling, that means we didn't take advantage of the time we have. I also think next year, the residents of our town, they're going to expect a small, if any, increase. And to do that, we will need to revamp our town government, and that includes the Board of Ed. We have plenty of innovation that's needed ahead of us for meaningful change and how we fund and enact the services for this town. So there'll be plenty of discussion with this topic in the future, but we're even going to meet this summer. We'll meet in July, probably meet in August. September will be here before we know it, and then we'll be right back at budget season. So I just hope we take advantage of the time that we have. But it's great to get to zero, and thank everybody again. We're here. We did what we had to do. We just have a lot of work before us over the next 8-9 months, and I know we all know that. So are there any other comments? Mr. Walsh?
I just wanted to say I'd be remiss if, in my comment that I made just before you started, Mr. Brown, did not thank the first select woman for offering up those 2 positions in DPW to help us get to zero. So I just wanted, I forgot, I meant to say that when I was originally speaking. So I appreciate her assistance in working with your team on that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I appreciate that. And I would say that I know this has been a difficult time for everybody, and it's been a difficult time for our community. Living through this situation has been really, really hard. And I know each of you feel it in a different way, but so many members of our community also feel it. And members of our community have lost loved ones. It's been really difficult. And I'm looking forward to the budget process being over. Sorry, I am. And getting to the management of our town finally, in the hard work that lays ahead of me and my administration, and we are excited about it. Now, granted, we don't have the exact tools we wanted to have in place to do some of the things we wanted to do, but you know, we can figure it out, and we've rolled up our sleeves, and we're ready to get to work. And these are things that I had envisioned at the very beginning. And I'm excited about our HR director because I've been really putting him through the ringer pretty good lately, and I'm spending a lot of time with him. And so we have a lot of good work to do, and I'm looking forward to reorganizing and finding efficiencies for our community. I know that we just saw that audit report yesterday. We got it in our office. I haven't had a chance to read through the whole thing, but a lot of it is stuff we already thought and we knew needed to be fixed. And so I'm looking forward to doing that for our community, and I'm looking forward to your input, and full steam ahead. Time to make some changes for our town and work together in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to that.
Thank you, Ms. Kupchak. Ms. Charlton, did I see your hand raised?
Yeah, I hate to go, and I appreciate the First Select Woman's comments. I hate to go back to the raining on the parade, but I think it's also important to mention that, you know, even though we have a flat mill rate, our spending is actually going up this year. And we are at a flat mill rate despite that because of the increase in our grant list. And that's something that, you know, we don't know how that's going to look next year. So just another challenge in front of us to keep in mind. So we, you know, the First Select Woman likes to say we're all in this together, and we are. I think it's with all of the things we discussed, we have a really big challenge ahead of us, and look forward to, you know, continuing to work collaboratively with all of you. It was a privilege to be elected to this board and to have such a collaborative process, and I hope that continues for the long term.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. And good point. Any other comments? If not, seeing none, I'm going to make a motion to set the mill rate for the 2021 budget at 26.79 and a tax rate increase of 0%. Can I have a second, please? Second by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor say aye. It is unanimous. Okay, nice job, everyone. Thank you. Our mill rate is set. Mr. DeWitt, your hand's still up. You have a question?
I just have asking for a moment of personal privilege.
Mr. DeWitt?
I would like to thank Ms. Gardner on her final mill rate presentation, and I'm very sorry that we didn't get to do this together this year, Linda, and I miss seeing you across the table and throwing me candies and doing all those things we've done for the last 13 years. But we're going to miss you, and that's it. Very much appreciate all your service to the town.
Thank you, Chris, and I'll leave some candies for you.
Thank you.
Your favorite kind.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Okay, the mill rate is set for fiscal year 2021. We'll go to item number 4, to hear, consider, and act upon the suspense list for the tax collector. Can I have a motion to put this before us, please? Mr. Mottola, seconded by Mr. Walsh. Mr. Kay, I'll turn it over to you.
To the board.
Can't hear you.
Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good evening, Chairman Brown and members of the board. I'm here to present the tax collector's suspense list in the amount of $112,153.40. Just to give a brief background here, if there are some new members of the board, this simply is me stating that we're going to be suspending the collection of certain accounts. By suspending, I mean we're going to no longer pursue our collection of these accounts for a number of reasons. For motor vehicle taxes, people may have passed away. For personal property, business taxes, the business is out of business, they've moved out of town. And, you know, our collection efforts, whether that means giving to a collection agency and them doing skip tracing, and they have been unable to find them. So we suspend the collection in order to establish a more accurate file of collectible accounts. So it does not mean we're not going to pursue collection still, or it means it's still collectible for 15 years. We just feel it's not going to be collected. So therefore we suspend it. And then just historically, the 112,000 figure, it is in line with past lists. So for example, last year the number was 107,000. 2 years ago, the number was 110,000. So it is in line. There are no outliers this year.
Okay,
Any
thank you,
questions?
Mr. Kay. Any questions?
You're welcome.
Mr. Walsh?
Good evening, David. Thank you for being here this evening.
No problem.
You know, I normally go through this list pretty thoroughly just to make sure a client of mine's not on there, because there's been past years if they are, I don't want to vote on this. But one name stood out on this that I have a question about, because I find it hard to believe that they would not be collectible from, and that's JP Morgan Chase Bank. It's on page 4 of the suspense report, about approximately 10 from the top, for $435.54. How can JP Morgan Chase Bank not be collectible? Be uncollectible? Seems like they'd be pretty easy to find. There's a branch actually in our town. Two branches, as Mr. Matola
Okay.
just pointed out.
So,
Or else he was telling me.
this is actually, so I'm looking at it here. So it's actually a motor vehicle tax.
Okay.
So it's possible that it could be a leased vehicle, and it is
On the leased vehicles, the lessor is responsible for the tax, and then the lessee, the person who leases the car, pays the lessor and their payments back the personal property tax, as far as I know, unless you can tell me the system works differently than that. So the owner of the car would be JP Morgan. In that scenario, on a leased vehicle, JP Morgan Chase Bank would own the car, and they'd ultimately be responsible. And then they would collect however they had to from their lessee. So
Correct.
I don't
Yeah,
understand.
Yeah, they would be responsible. I would have to look at the account directly for more information, but you are
Correct.
correct in saying that the leasing company would be responsible to pay us directly and then in turn collect from the lessee.
Okay. I don't want to hold this up over this small $435.54, but if you can just get me an answer on that privately.
Oh yeah, sure. I can definitely dig into that account and let you know.
I'm sorry, I read this stuff late, like, an hour before the meeting, and it caught my eye, and I didn't have a chance to talk to you. Otherwise, I would have reached out to you directly. So I don't want to hold it
With
up.
a motor
I'm willing
vehicle
to vote.
tax from 6 years ago, there's probably some logical explanation, and I can look at the account
That's
directly.
fine. That's fine. I don't want to hold it up, and I'm still going to vote for it. So
No problem.
thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Mr. Walsh. Any further questions? Anyone find their names on here?
Thank God, no.
Okay. Okay, good. That's good. So we can approve it. All right, I don't see any further questions. This motion is before us already. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. Thank you very much, Dave. Have a good night.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Okay, we're on to item number 5. To hear, consider, and act upon approving a memorandum of understanding in regards to establishing a non-lapsing account between the Board of Finance and the Board of Education for fiscal year 2021. Can I have a motion to put this before us? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Ms. Charlton. Before I turn it over, I just want to thank Mr. Walsh and thank Mr. Matola for working on this as you have over the past many weeks and getting this completed. I think you guys did a really nice job, and the Board of Ed's here tonight, and we'll discuss it. And I want to thank the town attorney for weighing in on this as well, Mr. Baldwin. So this is a MOU that we discussed on the night that we voted, May 11th, and even before that, we would look to establish this non-lapsing account. Due to COVID and additional expenses and savings, and so we were able to adjust our budget, 2021 budget accordingly. as long as we had this MOU in place, so the Board of Ed can continue to provide the educational services that it needs to provide. So, again, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Thank you for the Board of Ed for working with us on this. And with that said, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Mottola, I'll turn it over to you.
John, why don't you go first? He's muted.
Draft MOU, and I tried to reflect in there what our intent was and what we discussed during the budget season, and when we took a vote on it, and so I drafted up a rough draft. I sent it off to Mr. Walsh and Mr. Brown to take a look, and mostly Mr. Walsh, and also to the town attorney to take a look at it also. And Mr. Walsh then made some revisions to it. He beefed it up a lot, I think, and I think appropriately. We have the final document. I should say this, and I think our board will agree. I do think that the Board of Ed should have an opportunity to review it, and if they have any concerns about the documents, let us know. This can be an ongoing discussion. But I do think that the MOU as drafted does reflect what our intent is and was. It gives the Board of Ed those monies that we want to give them by establishing the non-lapsing account, monies that can be used for educational purposes and also for COVID-related unanticipated expenses. So that's really all I have to say. I think Jim should talk about the details about it, and if there's some questions, we'll try to answer it. And if there's something more that I need to say after discussing this, then I will do so. But I would turn it over to Mr. Walsh at this point.
All right, thanks, John. And John did a great job in putting together the framework of this, and it made it a lot easier for me to work with. Naming all these whereas clauses and stuff seems like it's easy, but it's not. But he really put together a really good framework that just allowed me to kind of go in and edit it or add some things on. And I would also like to thank the town attorney for providing his guidance and helping us with this, because that was very helpful. So, Mr. Baldwin, I appreciate all of your assistance on this. But I know when I did it, I mean, when I was looking at doing it and looking at John's draft, it was important to me that we lived up to our word as a board of what we told the Ms. Vitale and Mr. Cummings, what we were going to do, and that we lived by that. So I spent considerable time listening to both of the meetings. I think it was on May 7th and May 11th. And I listened to both of those meetings, taking notes twice to make sure we kind of lived up to what we said we were going to do. And I think that this memorandum, this MOU, gets us there. And it might seem a little longer than some people probably thought it might be, but I think it's overly clear on how things would work. And I kind of see this thing as more of more of a mechanical thing on how the money will come in, establishing what the real actual amount will be in this fund, and also addressing what would happen if the Board of Ed ended up finding further savings in their surplus was to grow, and their ability to possibly increase this amount up to the 2% statutory limit that we could put in if they believed they would have COVID-related expenses that would now need to get them up to that full 2%. So I kind of built a scheme where we needed to first figure out kind of how much money there's going to be now. And then secondly, my other major concern was that we give them the $1.5 million towards their operational budget for fiscal year 21. We told them we would do this as part of the cut, and when we voted for that. So I wanted to have that in there personally as well to show that we gave them that money because they can do whatever they want with that money. It becomes theirs. And then anything additional would go to COVID-related expenses. So there are paragraphs in here that would address what would happen if it is the exact number. It would be a miracle that Mr. Cummings would be able to predict that $3.3 million exactly. He's in the wrong business if he could do that. But you know, if it's 3.3, we'll put $3.3 million in there. I wanted to address what would happen if for some reason, when their numbers are all done, it was not $3.3 million, but say it was $3 million, how would that work? And it was important, at least to me, that the first thing that happens is we give them the $1.5 million we cut out of the budget because we said we were going to give them that. And then anything remaining would go for COVID-related expenses. But there's also, I wanted to address what would happen if the surplus grew above $3.3 million to the additional amounts that would basically take it up to, they could have access up to the $3.6 million and change. But, you know, what would that be? I thought it was important from our conversations that they would have to let us know why, you know, just tell us the reason why the numbers changed and went up. You know, maybe it was utility savings, maybe it was some savings in an area they never anticipated, but at least to hear it, as opposed to it automatically going in. And then they would have also the ability to, at that point in time, address, they'd have to address us at the same time because we'd have to approve the additional monies going in. Tell us the reasons why you think your expenses are going to be higher than the 3.3 that Mr. Cummings also put on his form that has now become Exhibit A to this agreement. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm interested to hear from Ms. Vitale and Mr. Cummings, but that Exhibit A, I don't see that as being etched in stone. I don't think anybody on this call thought it was ever etched in stone because it was a guess on where he thought he may have costs that he needed to absorb for summer programs, for extended special education days, you know, all sorts of things, masks and whatever. But as we all know, and I've been seeing the governor's constant barrage almost of executive orders, things are changing with this COVID pandemic on a daily basis. You know, businesses are having to adjust to it. You know, a couple of weeks ago, hairdressers thought they'd open up, bought all their supplies, and then the governor extended that. So things are changing, and I can't imagine an area where it's going to change as fast and maybe as expensively as how it's going to affect our children with their school year. So, you know, I know for me, and I talked to Ms. Vitale about this today, just to be clear, I talked to Mr. Cummings, I had the ability to talk to Mr. Asa, that I see the COVID expenses. I didn't put a definition in there because I didn't want to be locked into a formal definition, but to me, it's any expense that we might normally not have but for this COVID pandemic. You know, if it's transportation costs, which Ms. Vitale, I think, shared with Mr. Brown, and we got about what the state's saying that we might only be able to have 12 kids on a bus and be required to have a bus monitor, a new position. Well, to me, we're not saying it's with transportation costs are covered, but for COVID, you would not have those extra expenses. So to me, that's a COVID-related expense. So I don't know if I want to get all involved in doing a definition because no matter how well I try to do a definition, that definition could be 20 pages long and I would still miss probably half the possibilities. So that's why I didn't put a definitional term in there, but I see that Exhibit A as not being written in stone, but being a flexible thing because as we're sitting here today, I don't even know whether Mr. Cummings knows whether we can even have the summer program or not, or whatever version of that's going to be. Now, if it doesn't happen, that would free up $600,000 more that they'd be able to use, but rules might come down that continue to expand that might increase costs. Now,
I know there was some concern from talking to Ms. Vitale and Mr. Asa on board members that, were concerned that Mr. Cummings would have to keep coming to Board of Finance meetings continually for approvals and whatever. I don't see it working that way. I mean, the way I see it working, and I'd be interested to hearing from the rest of you on the board, is go ahead with your summer program and do what you can do and spend the money. It's going to take a couple of months for both the town has to close their books, but also the Board of Ed has to close their books and get all their final expenses into to exactly calculate what the amount of their surplus is for the year. We will get a presentation on both the town side and also the Board of Ed side in September. I think it would be a good thing to put on that agenda that night, since Mr. Cummings, Ms. Vitale, Doreen, everybody's got to be present anyway on either hopefully in person, but probably still on a Zoom call or a WebEx call, we put on this item and we talk about what their surplus is. They will have a much better idea on what happened over the summer. They will know by that certain point that definitely whether the kids went back to school or didn't go back to school, and maybe have a lot better chance to do more numbers on where they think what the extra expenses are going to be. But even that document is going to have to be flexible, and we're all going to have to understand that that's going to have to be flexible. So I don't want to keep talking. That's kind of where I went with this. It's just more of a mechanism thing about how the money would go and when you would need to get approvals. I'm not trying to have Mr. Cummings keep coming here. As I said, I think there's a possibility that we just do one meeting in September and cover it all. And if there's extra surplus, have a presentation on how he would use that extra surplus if he thinks there's going to be expenses that he needs to cover, and vote on the whole thing that night. And then Mr. Cummings and the board continue doing their diligent work on trying to fund the program and doing what's best for the children. So I don't want to go more. That in case anybody has any more questions, I'll answer them, but that's kind of where I am.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And again, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Just for the public, I just want to announce who is here with us, the Board of Finance from the Board of Ed. We have Mr. Cummings, the Superintendent of Schools, is with us. Ms. Vitale, the Chairman of the Board of Ed, is with us. Mr. Peterson is with us as he is the liaison from the Board of Ed to the Board of Finance. And I see Ms. Munsell is on the phone. I don't think I missed anybody. So before I turn it over to the Board of Ed for questions or thoughts, I just want to go to the Board of Finance to see if they have any questions. And I'll start with Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. So, Mr. Mottola and Mr. Walsh, thank you for your efforts. I know this is a lot of work, and I very much appreciate the efforts. I was surprised to not see, so there's a statement in here on the bottom of page 1 where it says pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, blah, 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 that 2% of the budget, which is annotated there down to the dollar of $181 million. So that's $3.6-ish million. I was surprised that number wasn't in here, and I'm curious why. And then I guess my second question is, I kind of understand why there was a $3.3 million cap, and I don't disagree with it. But I also, last month when we were talking, it's probably last week, I'm losing track of time, but there was a potential, I thought, that the savings could go north of $3.6 million. And if that were true, that number would then default to the town. And I don't see a statement that says that in here either. So those are my two questions, maybe for Mr. Mottola and Mr. Walsh through Mr. Brown.
I think that on the default, if the number's above the 3.6, I think it just automatically goes back to the town. I don't think you need to put that in the MOU. So, and then on the other issue, I'll let Mr. Walsh answer that one. I guess the other question is, why didn't we have a 3.6 actual figure in there? I mean, 2%, you can do the math and figure it out. I guess that's the reason, right, Jim?
Two things. Number one, I agree with Mr. Mottola. There's really no other place for it to fall to. We have to go to the town. So we're setting up this fund so that all of it doesn't go to the town. So anything above that, and God knows I hope it's $5 million, because I would love for the town to get $2 million back, but or $1.5 million or whatever it is. But it automatically defaults to the town. So that Mr. Mottola is correct. In regards to why the number is not there, I'm trying to figure out that myself, because I had put that in, and I'm just wondering whether between the edits going back and red lines between myself, Mr. Baldwin, and Mr. Mottola, I had the exact dollar amount. And I have a version in front of me now that shows that. So we could add that. We certainly could add that, not to exceed 2%. And hold on a second.
Yeah.
And that's certainly not a problem.
I mean, I'm with Mr. Mottola. I mean, I can do the math as well, right? I understand that. And thank you.
Yes, because Chris, after I provided a version, and I just think that somehow it just got edited out in error. But I don't think Mr. Baldwin had a problem, or Mr. Mottola, where after it said 2% in parentheses, I'd put $3,633,459.14.
For the record,
I can make that happen again, I guess, if we want to. Mr. Baldwin, you have something to say?
yes, I can explain that.
Okay.
Because it's not a number which is really we're relying on in any material way for this agreement. It's just a statement or restatement of the statute that says it should not exceed 2%. I thought it was unnecessary, and it could lead to confusion because we have so many numbers in the document. Because as Mr. Mottola said, the 2% is what it is. You can just do the math. That was the reason why it was taken out. Very simple.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I frankly don't understand why it would be confusing. I mean, to say 2% and then a budget number, you could have eliminated that whole sentence and just said, hey, the number is $3.6 million, right? So that seems a lot less complicated than the math. No, so listen, I don't care either way. I don't want to make this more cumbersome than it is. I think the document as a whole is accomplishing exactly what we wanted to do. I was just curious, and I just want to say thank you to Mr. Walsh. So, I guess the bottom line, what I got out of what Mr. Walsh said was, if this document did not exist, every dollar would have gone back to the town anyway. So this is just diverting the first $3.6 million, and then after that, then it's free for all.
Yeah. That's correct. That's the whole reason for the statute.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Ms. Charlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lori Charlton. I'll just thank Mr. Mottola and Mr. Walsh again for their work on this. I had a question on number 7, which says, the BOE understands and agrees that the any funds can be expensed from the non-lapsing account, that the BOE must authorize such expenditure. And I'm wondering how practically we can apply that for the 1.5 million, because the there's 2 pieces of this, right? The 1.5 million, and then there's the remainder, which can be used for COVID expenses. And the 1.5 million is just an aggregate number, right? It's not anything that's been separated from the, that's just to offset a general cut in the Board of Ed budget. So does that make sense? Because how could the Board of Ed possibly, approve anything related to the 1.5 since it's not, sort of a distinct dollar amount? So is that really meant to say, is that really meant to just relate to the COVID expenses, or how are we actually thinking about that one?
Mr. Walsh?
Well, I think I think the way that they would do that is by having a meeting and either just saying, we agree that we're gonna take that 1.5 and put it towards individual expenses. I will ask Ms. Vitale if she wants to jump in from a conversation I had with her earlier today. She thought that the board would take chunks of things that they know they need to spend money on and apply it towards the 1.5. Ms. Vitale, maybe you can, and then you guys could authorize that, but I'm not gonna speak for you, so why don't you just explain what you were talking to me today about?
Before, Mr. Mottola had his hand up. Mr. Mottola, you have a comment on that?
I think paragraph 7 is something I take ownership to. I think that was specifically something I drafted. And, you know, my thought process was, because this is a non-lapsing account, it's something different. And quite frankly, knowing some of the personalities on our Board of Finance, I just wanted some language in there that indicates how the money's being spent. But I understand what Ms. Charlton's saying, though. I don't necessarily disagree. But that was my thought process. So I'll leave it at that.
Ms. Charlton, do you have any further follow-up?
No, I don't think it's harmful. It's just, I think I don't know how the Board of Ed intends to do it. Because again, unlike the COVID piece where you might be approving the non-lapsing account for summer school or for purchase of laptops or whatever, the 1.5 is just part of the overall budget. So I mean, if that doesn't trouble the Board of Ed, I suppose they could approve the whole thing at once and be done with it, but it just seemed odd to me. So I'm fine with it. It just didn't make sense. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mr. Walsh, you want me to go to Ms. Vitale?
Yes, I do. But I think she might be able to clarify some of this and maybe it'd be helpful for our conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Vitale?
Hello, Christine Vitale, Chair of the Board of Education. To start, for that language, I don't have the statute language in front of me, but I believe the statute says the Board of Education has to actually approve any expenditure that comes out of a non-lapsing account.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay.
That's where it comes from, actually. This is a pretty bold.
It is somewhat of a challenge. I'm trying to make this not me personally, but this has been a discussion that the board leadership has had with Ms. Munsell and the superintendent as we make our budget adjustments to try to get, identify big ticket items to make it as easy as possible to say, we're making this cut, but we foresee it being offset by funding that's being provided by the non-lapsing account.
Thank you, Ms. Vitale. I think that answers the question. Mr. Baldwin, and then I'll go to Ms. Marmion. Mr. Baldwin, is that what you were going to respond to, or did you have something else?
I just want to confirm that language comes directly from the statute, so it's just repeating the statutory requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah, that was
Ms. Marmion.
Go
ahead, John.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at my sheet of things to include in this MOU, and Mr. Baldwin's right. That's thinking back 2 weeks ago. That's the reason I put that in there. Also, the statute does require it. So I apologize about my first inaccurate answer. Although that was in my mind too. So thank you.
Thank you. That's why you lawyers take good notes. You can refer back to them. Ms. Marmion.
Yes, thanks. Thanks to Mr. Mottola and Mr. Walsh for all your hard work. I guess I'm just trying to understand the process here. It's my understanding that Ms. Vitale and Mr. Cummings have been involved in this process. Have they had the time to really review this document? Do they have any comments in terms of, are they in agreement, general agreement with this? Is it going in front of the Board of Education as well? I'm just trying to understand how this process is going to go forward and what the Board of Ed general take on this MOU is, if you have any concerns or issues, et cetera.
Okay, who would like to answer Ms. Marmion's questions or thoughts? You want to go?
I can start, and then I'll give it to the superintendent, Christine Vitale, Chair of the Board of Ed. I'll be honest with you, we just are seeing within the last 24 hours. I first saw it when it was posted with the agenda. Mr. Brown forwarded me a copy this morning. I appreciate the time that Mr. Mottola and Mr. Walsh have spent with the board today, but I'll be honest, still digesting it. I have forwarded it to the Board of Ed just with some feedback. I have not heard back from everybody. We do have this on our agenda for our meeting next Tuesday to discuss it. I do have some initial concerns, which Mr. Walsh did address somewhat, primarily about Exhibit A. This Exhibit A that's included is somewhat of a fluid document, and it has the potential to change with every new set of executive orders, or if somebody gets sick and we have to go into crisis mode. So we need the superintendent to be able to react quickly. So some of the language in here that requires the superintendent to come before the Board of Finance to access some of this funding gives me pause, simply because if there is a crisis, we need you all to get together so he can take action. And I appreciate how difficult it can be sometimes to get a board of 9 together for very short notice, but it might be necessary, especially going into the summer, and a lot of decisions are going to be made. So that is one thing that I was concerned about. Sorry. Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, thank you, I can, and I apologize because the phone just started ringing in the office, which I'm not going to answer. I think I would follow up on that to say, I think the concern really is around a couple issues around that flexibility. One is the timing of meetings, and Mr. Walsh and I spoke about this afternoon. I think one of the requests we would have is to have some language perhaps in the MOU that simply says that the Board of Finance commits to meeting, and a special meeting if such a meeting is necessary in order to approve the funding that we might have. That's one area of the flexibility. And the other area of flexibility would be in the issue around what is a COVID-related expense. And I don't disagree with Mr. Walsh at all, because I think anytime you attempt to define and put borders around something, inevitably something's going to be left out of those borders by accident. But I gave him some examples today, and I just wanted to put those in front of the full Board of Finance. So one of the things that, if we think about our reaction to COVID-19 and the school closing, and not only this year, but clearly planning for next year, we are having conversations. I met with the administrative team of the district this morning. How are we going to prepare for, any of the iterations that we have going forward? If the kids are in their seats, all of them in the seats on September 1st, if some of them are in their seats, if nobody's in their seats, and we have work to do around revising our curriculum. We have work to do on professional learning for our staff so that we can improve our distance learning, delivery. Those, to my mind, are COVID-related expenses. We would not be dealing with this now. We had other wonderful plans to implement over the course of the next couple of years that have really been hijacked by this, and that's the way the world is working. We're gonna respond with, quite honestly, ferocity around this. But I think we want to have that flexibility that, from the Board of Finance's point of view, that when we look at issues like this, there's an understanding that as things arise, the things that are COVID-related expenses could be relatively broad. We'll be honest and fair about this, and we'll bring everything to you. But I just wanted to put that in front of you now as we speak.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Can you, or Ms. Vitale, just be more specific in what gives you some pause? I mean, right, we need to agree there has to be accountability here. There has to be some checks, and we need to work with each other, but it's always best to be kind of upfront on what the expectations are, and that's why I think there should be flexibility, but there also needs to be when are there checks? Okay, how flexible can we be? without getting ourselves concerned about these funds. So Ms. Vitale, if you can, or Mr. Cummings, just point out, which section gives you some pause? What wording gives you some pause specifically?
Does paragraph 5 bother you? Because I understand what you're saying, it may bother me a little. Maybe we were too specific.
Well,
Paragraph 5, part of paragraph 6, really, if any change from Exhibit A as it stands right now, that we need to come back before you for a presentation and approval, I could foresee that being cumbersome for everybody. The last paragraph of section 4, the BOE agrees that it will not use any non-lapsing account funds for new programs or initiatives that are not outlined and or identified in the Board of Ed fiscal year 21 budget. You know, I would add, or necessitated by the COVID-19 closure based on what the superintendent just shared, because there might be new programming that is necessitated by the COVID closure. And I understand Mr. Walsh's point about, you know, if we start defining what a COVID expense is, it could be going on and on, but I just want us all to have some cognizance of that some flexibility might be needed, and I don't want to handcuff the superintendent's ability to act quickly in a crisis if need be.
All right, thanks, Ms. Vitale. I just want to jump over to Mr. Walsh, because Mr. Walsh, you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I think if we're going to go through each one of these, we should address that and have any board member talk about it and move on. But I agree that there should be flexibility. I think my internal definition of this is that if something that is only caused because of COVID, you should be able to expense it out. It's a very simple definition. So if you have new training for teachers and that's because of COVID, then you should be able to spend it. If your bus procedures change, the same thing. I think in paragraph number 4, well, I'll deal with that directly. I don't see what the issue is with 4. You're going to get $1.5 million pretty much immediately. You can do whatever you want with the 1.5. Now, in regards to the COVID thing, we had talked about there being no new programs and initiatives, and maybe, I mean, other than maybe, are you asking us to put in a parentheses to say other than COVID-related programs and initiatives? Because that's, I think, what, I don't know, I'm interested to hear from the other board members. That's, if it's COVID-related, if it's there, but if COVID wasn't there, if you're doing anything just because of COVID, to me, you should be able to spend it.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I like that. I like a simpler, broader definition so that you're not worrying about whether it's, you know. But if you add, you know, here's where I'd have a problem. You add on to a building with some of the money, and it has nothing to do with COVID. You just want to expand a building or make Mill Hill bigger or do something. I don't know, but that would not be covered. But I think you guys are pretty, I think everyone, I want everyone, though, I want to hear from the rest of our board to make sure that my definition is what everybody else thinks the definition should be.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. Charlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On paragraph 4, would it be helpful, I think that last sentence in paragraph 4 that Ms. Vitale expressed concern about, isn't that meant to just relate to the 1.5 million? Because COVID stuff, by definition, is new programs, right? So maybe we could clarify that there. That would be one suggestion. On the other points that Ms. Vitale raised, on paragraphs 5 and 6, I guess I'm reading it differently because it sounds like you're concerned about some pre-approval mechanism by the Board of Finance. And that would be a concern because that would hamper the flexibility of Mr. Cummings, but that's not how I read it. When I look at 5, it says, you know, after the 1.5 million, we agree that the remaining balance can be used should be paid for unanticipated expenses, period. It doesn't say that they have to be pre-approved. And then it just gives the amount. And then paragraph 6 says, if there's, you know, unanticipated expenses above the amount in Exhibit A, it doesn't say other than the nature of those described in Exhibit A, then, you know, any amounts can be used to pay for these expenses upon authorization. So I guess, you know, that's what I'm confused as to where the specific concern is on the language, because I do agree it would be a concern, but I'm not reading where we would, you know, need to pre-approve something and have to pull together a quick meeting in order to do that.
What
so maybe
if,
you know, I don't know if I'm just not reading it right, but I don't see it there.
All right, thank you, Ms. Charlton. Ms. Vitale?
so if what's outlined on Exhibit A changes tomorrow,
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
what would be the procedure?
Okay, I'll tell you what the
What would need to
procedure is. I wrote paragraph 6 to cover that because I did not want you to be locked into Exhibit A. So if there's stuff that you don't spend it on, you can spend it on other COVID-related pandemic expenses.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Vitale, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, does that answer that one concern that you had?
For now, but I'm going to defer to the superintendent, Ms. Munsell, also, because a lot of this, I want to hear from the people making the decisions every day and that need to allocate this money and account for this money. And as I said, I'll be honest, I'm still digesting some of the language. Really looked at it late last night and early this morning, and it's been somewhat of a busy day. So
Okay.
I'm
That's
hoping
fair
it's a
enough.
privilege to get back to you with more questions. Just some feedback from my board. There was just concern about being overly prescriptive, tying everything back to the detail on Exhibit A.
Right, and I understand that concern, and at the same time, you know, we have to ensure that we're all living up to what the agreement stated back when we voted for this and said we're going to vote for this on May 11th.
I appreciate that.
So, Mr. DeWitt, I just want to see if Mr. Cummings had any concerns or questions or thoughts on this current discussion. Did you have something to follow up on this discussion, Mr. DeWitt, or something else?
It's basically this, but Mr. Cummings can certainly go first.
Okay, Mr. Cummings?
Thank you. I would ask Ms. Munsell to weigh in because ultimately, you know, in this office, it's going to be her talking to me about how this is going to work and how we're going to play this out. And as we go forward into the Board of Ed next week, and they adopt the final budget, how we account in the non-lapsing account for the 1.5 million plus the COVID. So, Doreen, if you have questions, please go ahead.
Sure. Doreen Munsell, Executive Director of Finance. Regarding number 6, my question there would be, is the intention that a Board of Finance vote is necessary if any remaining amount were to be used for non-COVID expenses? Because I don't read it that way.
To me, when I was writing it, I thought we were only talking about COVID expenses. So if there was things not on Exhibit A, which I'm sure there's going to be plenty, because you might not even be doing one thing on Exhibit A, who knows, because of the changes that keep being made, then it still has to be COVID related. If there are any unanticipated expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic above the amounts detailed in Exhibit A. So if you say you spent $0 on Exhibit A because you decided under the rules and regulations and where this pandemic takes us, you're not going to do any of those programs, or you cannot legally do any of those programs. Anything above that, the whole amount
could be used for other things.
But the way I read it, it needs authorization by the Board of Finance.
I'm looking at that. I might be willing to amend it to take that out.
Thank you.
No, I think we'd have to, I think the reason why we put it in there, I wrote it that way, was when we discussed it the first time on the 7th, we talked about that if things change, we'd want an update, but we will be getting an update quarterly at our quarterly meetings. And this agreement, so I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I might be willing to amend that section if the concern is that you would have to keep coming back to us.
Okay, Mr. Walsh.
I would agree.
Mr. Mottola, you're in agreement with that?
Yeah, I don't think our intent was to have the superintendent come back to us. Our intent was to get, right, Jim? Our intent was to get periodic updates through the quarterly meetings about how you're spending this money.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think we could change that language.
I thank you, Mr. Mottola. Any comments, other comments from the board in regards to paragraph 6? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. I read this the way Mr. Walsh articulated it. When I read this, Exhibit A is kind of a baseline, and if there are additional COVID expenses, then they would be they'd be able to be used by this account. But I thought, holistically anyway, we wanted to make sure that monies weren't used for things like Mr. Walsh said, put another room on Mill Hill or something like that. So I understood that Exhibit A wasn't constraining. I didn't get the fact that you have to come back to us, for approval, except for there was one line about that. And that's my last comment. The word emergency has been used 3 times by Ms. Vitale and Mr. Cummings, and I guess I don't understand what in here would be considered an emergency. We've talked about it a couple times, I think, tonight already. We're probably going to meet through the summer, July and August, which we normally don't do. Our board has usually been pretty good about getting emergency meetings if we need to. We don't need to get 9, we can get 7 or even 5 if we really had to, right? So I guess I don't understand what would be considered such an emergency that we would have to meet in less than 2 weeks or so. This seems to be longer term stuff that doesn't, it's not like we're paying the contract and we have to pay him before he does something. So I'm a little don't quite understand what emergency means.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh.
Following up on just what Mr. DeWitt said, I had an issue with that too, because to me, you guys can go to the town and pull down any of your money, and we will clearly reimburse it out of this lapsing account. I don't understand why you guys couldn't just, if an emergency came up and you needed $300 and some odd thousand dollars to do something, why you couldn't just pull that money from the town, your money that's been approved, and we would clearly reimburse you for that out of the lapsing account once it's established. The problem we have with the lapsing account of what monies are going in is we do not know what dollar amount it is until your books close, until the Board of Ed's books close, which I talked to Mr. Cummings, or maybe Ms. Vitale, I might be screwing up the conversations, but, and they said that they had spoken to Doreen and she thought she might be able to get those done by the end of July, maybe. But, the process has to finish where we know how much money is going in there. Until then, if you have an emergency situation, just like on your summer program, you're not waiting until we figure out what money's in here. If you're gonna do the summer program, it's starting in a couple of weeks. I think. You tell me if I'm wrong. So this whole emergency thing to me is kind of, I didn't understand what you were talking about, because
you think it's COVID related, just spend the money, and you know there's some version of this. You guys are in the best position to be near Ms. Munsell and ask her where she really thinks these numbers are going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're hearing a lot of flexibility on our board's part to want to, as long as, it, you know, and I still want to hear from everybody else about whether they agree with my definition, that if it's, you know, not the COVID-related definition, that everyone agrees with it, because that's kind of an important part. And I think it would be important for Ms. Vitale to be able to take that back to her board, and Mr. Peterson, who heard it as well, to be able to explain what our kind of definition is, and it's kind of a loose definition, a liberal definition of that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Testani?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jack Castani. I just want to echo Mr. Walsh's comments. Say I agree. The only sort of question I have about some of this would be the identification of the COVID-related expenditures. So we have them identified in the MOU, right? And we talked about them at previous meetings, but let's just say there's an expenditure that may be unexpected, right? Is perhaps that's what the thought process is behind the word quote unquote emergency in the upcoming months. But again, to get to Mr. Walsh's point, the money could be expended and we would just reimburse. I think that's the point, if I'm hearing it correctly, that we're all trying to make. But I certainly think, like, I'm on board with, and thank Mr. Walsh and certainly Mr. Mottola for all the effort they put into this. And I think we can get to a good place. It's just a matter of making sure, you know, all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed with regard to how we're going to move forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Testani. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
If we amended, or Ms. Munsell, either one, if we amended paragraph 6, are there any other paragraphs that give you concern, or any other wording or sentences that give you concern?
I'm looking through, I apologize. Dorian, I don't know, do you have anything right immediate?
On number 3, I was, we do close our books. We do a soft close on June 30th, and then we close for good on July 31st. So depending on what the actual number is at that point in time, I wasn't sure how mechanically number 3 would work with any amounts over the 3.3.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
Ms. Munsell, you broke up a little bit there, but are you talking amounts that are above the additional $333,459.14?
No, I thought it was a 3.3.
Oh, yeah, 3.3. And then it says, if there is more than $3,300,000 of unexpected funds from the fiscal year 20 appropriated Board of E funds, the additional amount above the $3,300,000 deposited is basically we're presuming that that's what you're going to get, not to exceed $333,459.14, because that's the amount that gets us up to the $3.6 million in change, which is your maximum of the 2%. So it's up to that amount. Now,
right. Okay.
So you might come back to us and say, hey, you know what? Our surplus is $3,450,000, which would then entitle, potentially you could ask us to put in another $150. You might find an extra $150,000 than you kind of roughly estimated a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying then is that would probably be the end of July, and would we be able to get that approval in that time frame?
Well, I guess we could probably try to fit you into an August meeting, if that's really important to you. I was trying to have as few meetings as possible. I mean, you have access to a large pot of money, $180,000, $180 million bucks, if you needed it. I was trying to limit the number of meetings. So I thought the great part about our end of the fourth quarter quarterly is that school would have been started, I would imagine, if it starts at all, or whether you're going to do the distance learning. We're going to be a lot further down the road for Mr. Cummings and Ms. Vitale to tell us really where they think this educational program is going. I mean, you'll be able to tell them how much they could spend because you'll know the numbers. And I don't know about everybody else. I mean, once again, I keep saying this, but I'd like to hear from everybody else. If there's extra money, my inclination, and you can show me that you're going to have the expense, my inclination is to, as long as it's a reasonable, reason why you want to spend the money, is to give you the additional money.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you.
Mr. Mottola has his hand up, and then we'll go back to Ms. Munsell. Mr. Mottola?
I agree with what Mr. Walsh said. If you give us a reasonable explanation, I think this board's intent is to give you that money. And if it's at an August meeting or a September meeting, I don't think that makes a big difference. So that's how the process would work. And I think by statute, we would have to vote to authorize the transfer of the money too. So I understand your concern, but if the board shows that, gives us a reasonable explanation why you think this money is necessary, this board's gonna transfer that money into the non-lapsing account. I don't think you should be overly concerned about that. That's me speaking. I think Mr. Walsh said the same thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't worried about availability of funds, but I'm just so used to being done, closing out the year on July 31st. I suppose, adding to it after that fact is not going to be a problem, I guess.
Yeah.
If necessary. Yep. Okay.
All right, thanks, Ms. Munsell. Thank you. Ms. Vitale, you had a comment?
No, I just really I appreciate the dialogue. Some of my concerns, you're making me feel better. I wanted just to hear from all of you. I appreciate the time, as I said, that Mr. Walsh took with me this morning, but I also just want to have an open conversation of what the expectation is. And I appreciate that if we have an emergency, we can use money from the operating budget, but I hope you understand that I want to have some security in knowing that the money is going to be there in the non-lapsing account to fill that hole. I don't want to create a hole in the operating budget. We need to buy 10,000, 20,000 more masks so we can open school in 2 weeks. We're going to spend that money. It's something the operating budget might be affected, and we're going to assume that you'll be okay with that, even though it might not be on Exhibit A. We'll be spending money and coming back to you after the census potential. That's all. And I feel that we really are on the same page on that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mottola?
Exhibit A was what the board gave us. And I know, just to ease your mind, the very last thing says total possible expenses. So it's kind of a flexible document that way too. It's not written in stone that these will be the COVID-related expenses. I think we all realize that.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Vitale, are you feeling more at ease as time goes by here?
I am. Okay. Thank you. And I appreciate the conversation and the time that it's taken.
It's okay. Hey, we've been here to midnight before. We're in no rush.
Yes, I've been here close to midnight with you. I appreciate you having the agenda earlier today.
Yep, time is of no issue here. What is of issue is that we get this done, right? Okay. And so we'll take the time we need to get this done. Mr. Testani, you had another question, comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo Mr. Walsh's point and say that I agree, and I know we covered it, but I know he was looking for sort of a sense of the body that we're I'm in agreement that they can certainly, the Board of Ed can certainly spend whatever is deemed appropriate in that time frame. And as Mr. Walsh alluded to, we will certainly reimburse if necessary. I think, Jim, that was your point, right?
Yes, if they have to emergency spend money, as long as you believe it's COVID related and think you can make a reasonable argument for that, then spend the money.
Exactly, right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sistani. Mr. Walsh?
In order to make everybody feel maybe a little bit more happy, I can amend paragraph 6 to say, read, the Fairfield BOE and BOF understand and agree that if there are unanticipated expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic above, and then I would add the language, and or different than the amounts detailed in Exhibit A, any amounts remaining in the non-lapsing account can be used to pay those expenses, period.
Okay, so Mr. Walsh is amending the MOU. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. Matola. Okay, any discussion on the amendment? The amendment itself? Seeing no discussion on the amendment, all those in favor of the amendment to the MOU, say aye.
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 Okay, it is unanimous. So now we have the amended MOU in front of us. So I'll go back to the Board of Ed to see if there are any other questions before we vote on the MOU as amended. Mr. Cummings or Ms. Monsell?
I do not. Doreen?
I'm good. Thank you.
Ms.
Very
Vitale?
much appreciated.
Thank you. Ms. Vitale, any further questions?
I do not, but I'm going to ask our Board of Finance, my fellow board member who is also on this call, if, you know, as speaking as another member of the board and as the liaison to your board.
Mr. Peterson?
You're muted, Mr. Peterson.
Strange. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Apologies. Ms. Vitale handled my comments very, very ably, so I have nothing. One clarification I'd like to make is the effect of the amendment that was just passed to end Section 6. After that phrase, the non-lapsing account can be used to pay for these expenses, period. Is the rest of that number removed?
Yes.
Okay. And thank you for that. I do appreciate that. And as, you know, Ms. Vitale said earlier, you know, and throughout this conversation, we'll get a lot of, I think the board is going to ask a lot of the questions that we've asked tonight. And I really appreciate the back and forth that we've had in this discussion, because it's going to clear up a lot of questions that certainly will come up for us on Tuesday. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. Just procedurally, just so I'm clear. So potentially, we're going to vote this forward. It's going to go to the Board of Education, and they're going to vote. And then the two signatures at the bottom will be completed, and that will be the due process. Is that correct?
Yes. That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Matola?
I'm sorry, hang on. Can you hear me? Yes. So I just, and there was some discussion with respect through emails between myself and the three Jims, including the town attorney. Now, the Board of Ed has to look at this document. They're all getting together to meet. And maybe this is a question for Jim Baldwin. If the Board of Ed makes a change to this document, we probably would have to meet again to approve it. I guess the question is, if it's not considered a substantive change, can Mr. Brown sign this document without us meeting again? And I guess that's a question for Mr. Baldwin.
Hi, this is Jim Baldwin. I would agree with that. I think a good example is the one that we discussed earlier with respect to the first paragraph, such as if they wanted to put in that number that was taken out, that would be, I consider, not a material change. A substantive change, I think we have to go back to the board. I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Just so the Board of Finance knows, if there are any changes at all, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Baldwin, and I'll let him let me know if it's significant or not. Or he'll let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. I won't make that call on my own.
Good,
So,
thank you.
that way I stay out of trouble. Okay. So, any further comments on the MOU as amended? So we are ready to vote. So, all those in favor of the MOU in regards to this non-lapsing account between the Board of Finance and the Board of Education for fiscal year 2021 as amended, say aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. So, Ms. Vitale, I will, I'll contact you some point tomorrow, and we'll talk about next steps.
All right, sounds good.
All right?
And again, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your support on this. I think that we are really, as a town, just going to need to work together. Getting our kids back to school and back in those buildings, I know, is a priority for everybody. And I appreciate your helping making that a reality.
Thank you. And Mr. Walsh?
Just a moment of personal privilege. And number one, I appreciate working with Ms. Vitale, and as you know, I've worked with Mr. Peterson before, and Mr. Asa and Mr. Cummings on this. And it was easy to work with them and answer their questions. And we'll continue to do that and keep an open line of communications as things change.
Very much appreciated.
You will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night to the Board of Ed. Thank
Bye.
you.
Mr. Brown, before we move on to the next item, just a moment of personal privilege, because I forgot earlier. I wanted to thank Mr. Baldwin, Attorney Baldwin, for the work that he had done as well. I left his name out on the bus contract and worked with the Board of Education in regards to finding larger savings on that. He was a kind of a driving force on that, from what I understand. So, I really want to thank him for helping to find some of those savings and to work with everybody, because I did not list his name when I mentioned Mr. Brummer and Mr. Flynn. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Okay, we're on to item number 6. To hear, consider, and approve the appointment of auditors for the fiscal year 2021. And for this, I'll turn it over to Ms. Leclerc. Oh, I'm sorry, can I put this on the table? Can I have a motion? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mrs. Leclerc. And Mrs. Leclerc, I'll turn this over to you.
Well, there's not a whole lot to say. Just before this meeting, the audit committee recommended that we recommend our current auditors again for this fiscal year. And I believe they're still working on, they had previously, a few years ago, put in a bid, and so we're still working within that current bid. So there is no changes really to be made.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Are there any questions, comments? Okay, all those in favor for this motion, say aye.
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 Okay, it is unanimous. On to item number 7, to appoint the clerk and assistant clerk for the Board of Finance for the next year ending May 2021. Can I have a motion to put this before us? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Ms. Charlton. And I would like for the board to consider for this appointment as our clerk, Ms. Caitlin Bassi, and assistant clerk, Ms. Jennifer Carpenter. And I spoke to them both, and they are both interested. There were no other interviews. There were no other people that showed of interest. So Ms. Bassi, are you there, Ms. Bassi?
I am.
Yep. So you enthusiastically came before us and we had a great talk and you're ready to be our clerk for the next year. Can you just please verify that for us?
That's a lie, Jim.
We did have a conversation. Yes, I can validate that.
All right, well, thank you.
Arm twisting?
Is the word enthusiastic correct, Ms. Bossy?
She
I'm
sounded
not so
enthused.
sure about that. I was enthusiastic in one regard, yes, but we did have a conversation.
All right, very good. So Ms. Bassi is on board for a year and Jennifer Carpenter is as well. So can we have a vote of approval, please? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous, Caitlin. You are on board unanimously. Good job. Okay, so next, we're going to go to, we're on item number 8, private executive session. We're going, and in this private executive session, and this is something that came up at our last, I believe it was our last board meeting, as we were discussing the possible third-party recovery effort regarding certain investment losses with the town attorney. And we decided, with some of the questions that were being raised, that it was best to go into executive session with them, and that's what we will do. So, Mr. Kell, first of all, can I have a motion to take us into private executive session? Mr. Walsh, second by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're back in public session, and as Ms. Charlton stated, we're on item number 9, which is to adjourn. Just so the board knows, we talked about meeting in July. I did talk to Jennifer Carpenter. She's going to post that meeting. So that will be July 7th. I'm just looking at my calendar here. Yes, that will be July 7th.
Tuesday.
Okay, and we will meet and we'll have a couple of items to discuss, I know. And one of them will be the final report that Mr. Santafanti had been working for us for these many, many months on the results of the procedures and performed for the Public Works Department review. We had an audit committee meeting earlier, as you know, and Mr. Santafanti stated that he can make that meeting. So he'll be there in July. We may ask Connie Saxel to be with us too, to talk to us about some of the audits that she has done and what she plans on doing. Mary, I think that would be a good idea if we're going to speak to audits. If Connie could be there, maybe you could see if she's not going to be on vacation and she could join us too. We want to bring her before us at least twice a year. I think we had her in January, was it? So every 6 months might be a good time. So with that said, any other comments from this board? Mr. DeWitt?
Just real quick about August, would we make the decision about an August meeting maybe in July's meeting?
I was thinking that that's what we would do. And that would be August 4th. I guess one way to do it is to set up the meeting and I can always cancel it. Why don't I do that?
Yeah, I was kind of defaulting to that and figured we could cancel, but for right now, I mean, the foreseeable future, it feels like there's a need for a meeting, but.
Okay, I agree with that. I will set up a meeting for the 4th of August, and if the board does not feel we need it, we won't have it. But I'm thinking that we're gonna want to meet in August too. But we'll see. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, can I have a motion to, Caitlin?
Yes.
You all say you have any comments for us? Any announcements or anything we should know?
Communications.
Any communication?
No, I believe we've had a lot of meetings lately, and there's nothing new to report.
Motion to adjourn? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Ms. Charlton, all those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Okay, it is unanimous. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.